Good morning, children. Today we are going to discuss about the most important concept in the biodiversity, that is biodiversity and its conservation. So, you know the meaning of conservation, which is very useful to protection or the protection of our natural resources. It's called conservation. So, here, what is this conservation? Why should we have to conserve? Related to that information we will discuss in this video. So observe very carefully the biodiversity and its conservation we are discussing. So the natural resources of the earth, including what are the natural resources generally, what you know about natural resources which are present in the nature, like air, water, soil. Okay, like these kind of resources are called natural resources. So the natural resources of the earth, including air, water, land, flora and fauna of natural ecosystems, must be safeguarded for the benefit of the present and future generations through careful planning and management as appropriate. So the principle of Stockholm Declaration 1972. So what is this one? Principle of the Stockholm Declaration in 1972. What is this one? Observe very carefully. Natural resources of the earth, including air, water, land, flora and fauna of natural ecosystems, must be safeguarded. So protected for the benefit of the present. So present benefit and future generations through careful planning and management. Okay, as appropriate. Planning and management as appropriate. So it's given whom principle of the Stockholm Declaration 1972. Principle of the Stockholm Declaration. So we have to protect our biodiversity. Why? For our benefit, for the present and future generations. See, if air is there, air is good, so it is good for us right now. Even next generations also, the air should have to be useful, required for them. So good air we should have to provide to them. So this is a point you should have to remember. The second one, water. You know very well the importance of water and the land. So you know, for agriculture point of view, you know, plants, forests, fauna, animals, all are important. So we should have to safeguard it for the benefit of the present and future generations through careful planning and management as appropriate. So principle of Stockholm Declaration 1972. Next important, the large scale loss of biodiversity and its global impact makes conservation the need of the hour. So large scale loss of biodiversity and its global impact, you know, loss of biodiversity and its global impact on the globe, that impact what is there, that makes the conservation the need of the hour. So these are all the points we should have to remember. So conservation, so you know how many problems are there when you lose the, or when you lost the biodiversity. So large scale impact is there on the biodiversity, large scale. So because of the loss of biodiversity, it is affecting our global environment, global pollution also. So we should have to protect our biodiversity. Next, conservation of biodiversity is protection and scientific management of biodiversity so as to maintain it at its optimum level and derive sustainable benefits for the present as well as the future generations. So same I said, conservation of biodiversity is a protection and the scientific management of biodiversity so as to maintain it at its optimum level and very important, very derive sustainable benefits for the present as well as future generations. So benefits we should have to get. Protection and scientific management of biodiversity so as to maintain it at its optimum level and derive sustainable productions. Benefits for the present as well as future generations. So it aims to protect species. What's the main aim? It protects the species from the extinction. Okay, which one is going to extinct? That one we should have to protect, and their habitats and ecosystems from degradation. So protection of the species from extinction. So for example, the tiger species are going to extinct, so we should have to protect, because every species is important in the food chain and food web and ecosystems and biodiversity. So almost all species which are in endangered, those all species we should have to protect. So this is a point you should have to remember. So it aims to protect the species from extinction and their habitats and ecosystem from the degradation. So all important only habitats we should have to protect, and what you called species we should have to protect, and ecosystems should have to protect from the degradation. So what we have to do for this? What we have to do for this all the things? Electrical strategies, sorry, general strategies in conservation. So general strategies for conservation, for its conservation, what we have to do? General strategies in conservation. So what you have to do, that is important. So how to protect all the strategies for conservation, what kind of things we should have to follow. Observe carefully. First one, strategies for conservation. Number one, identify and protect all threatened species. First point one, what? Identify and protect. Identify and protect all threatened species. So this is important. We should have to identify and we should have to protect all the threatened species. Identified and protect. Identify which one is endangered, so that particular species we should have to be protect. That is the first strategies for conservation. Second one, identify and conserve in protected areas. Okay, identify and conserve in protected areas the wild relatives of all the economically important organisms. So another important, what is this? Identify and conserve in the protected areas. Okay, identify and protect in the conserved areas, protected areas, the wild relatives of all the economically important organisms. All the economically important organisms. This point you should have to remember. What's the meaning of that? Suppose economically important organisms, so many are there. So what we have to do? We should have to protect all the economically important organisms, and where they are living. So what are the main habitats? We have to find out. Identify and conserve in protected areas. So one protected areas, we have to the wild relatives of all the economically important organisms. Next, identify and protect critical habitats for feeding, breeding, nursing, resting of each species. Identify. Next important thing is most important, and protect critical habitats. Okay, so what I'm telling is identify and protect critical habitats for feeding, breeding, nursing, resting of each species. So we should have to protect the habitats. So why habitats we should have to protect? Why? Because why should we have to protect the habitats? In the sense that so many species are there, especially for feeding, for breeding, for nursing, for resting of each species will be there in the habitat. So that's why we should have to protect. Next one, resting, feeding. Okay, this one, and breeding places of the organism should be identified and protected. So let's see, resting, feeding, where they will rest, where they will eat, where they will breed, those places of the organism should have to be identified and protected. Next, air, another important one. Air, water and soil should be conserved of the what you call priority basis. What you call air, water and soil should be conserved on the priority basis. This point you should have to remember. So Wildlife Protection Act should be implemented. Wildlife Protection Act should be implemented. Why Wildlife Act should have to be implemented? Because there will be law and order will be supports the what you called wildlife conservation. So if any illegal things are there, this law will be object. So that's why Wildlife Protection Act should be implemented. Once again, children. So general strategies in conservation we are discussing. Why should we have to conserve? For because benefits for the present as well as future generations. Present and as well as future generations, we should have to get benefits from the biodiversity, right? So once the problem is there, that will affect the complete globally. So that's why we should have to protect biodiversity. So what are the strategies in conservation of biodiversity? Okay, so the strategies for the conservation of biodiversity. Number one, identify and protect all threatened species. Identify and conserve in protected areas. Conserve in protected areas the wild relatives of all the economically important organisms. Identify and protect critical habitats for feeding, breeding, nursing, resting of each species. The resting, feeding, breeding places of the organism should be identified and protected. Air, water and soil should be conserved on priority basis. Wildlife protection should be implemented. Protection Act should be This is important. Wildlife, what you called Protection Act should be implemented. So these are the general strategies for the conservation of biodiversity. Next, some more important things are there. There are two aspects of conservation strategies. Two aspects for the conservation strategies. Number one, what are those two strategies? Number one, in situ conservation and ex situ conservation. What do you call? In situ conservation and ex situ conservation. See now, in situ conservation, this is conservation in the natural habitat. What is in situ conservation? Where they are living, there itself protection is called in situ conservation. Conservation in the natural habitat. Conservation in the natural habitat. This is the conservation of genetic resources. It's the conservation of genetic resources through what is called their protection within a natural or man-made ecosystem in which they occur. So what is it? This is the conservation of genetic resources, genetic materials through their protection within a natural or man-made ecosystems in which they occur. So where they will be occur, there itself the protection, genetic resource through their protection within a natural or man-made ecosystem. The whole ecosystem, next important point, in which the conservation and protection of the whole ecosystem and its biodiversity at all levels in order to protect the threatened species. So here what will be? Protection, all levels in order to protect threatened species. It is conservation and protection of the whole ecosystem. Whole ecosystem we should have to protect, in situ conservation. And another thing, and its biodiversity at all levels in order to protect the threatened species. For protecting threatened species, total ecosystem and their habitats we should have to protect, in the sense that is called in situ conservation. Total, where they are living, the total ecosystem, their habitats, everything. For what? To protect threatened species. That is called in situ conservation. So this is important. Maximum protection of biodiversity, hotspot regions. Maximum protection of biodiversity, which regions? Hotspot regions with very high levels of species richness. Why hotspots? High levels of the species richness, you know very well. So you believe or not, although all the biodiversity hotspots together cover less than 2% of the earth land area. So even though very less land, less than 2% of the earth area covers the land area, earth land area. Okay, that is important. The number of species they harbor is extremely high. So in these hotspots, number of species are extremely high, harbor extremely high, and protection of these hotspots could reduce the ongoing loss. So protection of these hotspots reduces the ongoing problems, ongoing mass. Now, protected area. These are biogeographical areas. Protected areas, biogeographical areas where biological diversity along with natural and cultural resources is protected. Biogeographical area along with natural and cultural resources is protected. Next, another important thing is what we have to do. Protected, okay, maintained protected, maintained and managed through legal measures. Managed through legal measures, that is important. So what I am telling, these are the biogeographical areas where biological diversity along with natural and cultural resources is protected. Maintained, natural resources are protected, okay, maintained and managed through the legal measures. So another important one includes national parks. The areas includes which one? National parks, wildlife sanctuaries, community reserves, biosphere reserves, okay, wild conservation monitoring center, wild conservation monitoring, what is called center. This is important. Wild Conservation Monitoring Center has recognized 37,000 protected areas worldwide. What is that one? World Conservation Monitoring. Okay, this is important. World Conservation Center has recognized 30 World Conservation Monitoring Center. This point important. Need bit. World Conservation Monitoring Center has recognized 37,000 protected areas worldwide. India has about 771 bit protected areas covering 16,20,099 kilometers. You know, when 1,62,099 kilometers square, comprising of national parks. How many national parks? One nation and 104. This is a neat bit. 104 national parks, 544 wildlife sanctuaries, 18 biosphere reserves, and several sacred groves. So, what are the protected areas? This is important. Observe carefully. These are the biogeographical areas where biological diversity along with natural and cultural resources is protected. Natural and cultural resources is protected. So, cultural resources is protected, maintained and managed through legal measures. Protected areas include national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, community, what do you call it? This is a very important. Okay, national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, community reserves, what do you call it? Community reserves, and biosphere reserves. Okay, biosphere reserves also there. So now, World Conservation Monitoring Center. World Conservation Monitoring Center. How many? You know very well. Recognize 37,000 protected areas. Nearly, you believe or not, worldwide, if you see 37,000 protected areas monitoring for conservation. India is about 771 protected areas covering 1,62,099 kilometers. Okay, comprising the national parks 104, wildlife sanctuaries 544, biosphere reserves 18, 104 national parks, wildlife sanctuaries 544, biosphere reserves 18, several sacred groves also in this in situ conservation will be there. So like this, we have to protect our biodiversity in situ way. And tomorrow will be discussed about the national park. How many national parks are there? What kind of protection is going on in the national parks will be discussing tomorrow.